And now I've been arrested about 75 times, and I'm an ex-con, and I can never vote, and I have a problem with recidivism, but that's another story. I was arrested on Holy Thursday night with a bunch of Franciscans and Jesuits and nuns and friends near Las Vegas, just 6 months ago, whenever that was. We knelt down at the entrance to Creech Air Force Base, where Bush and now Obama has the headquarters for all the U.S. drones. This is the future of war. These are unmanned bombers full of gasoline, cameras, and bombs that are trained there. We saw them flying all around the sky. There's nobody in them. And they're dropping bombs all over Afghanistan and Pakistan. Killed hundreds of civilians just this year alone. We knelt down, brought flowers. They arrested us and put us in jail, in the Las Vegas jail overnight, which was quite an experience on Holy Thursday. And we were expecting a trial about a couple of weeks ago, and I was facing 6 months in jail. But just in July, the prosecutor dropped all the charges. But Kathy, I wasn't expecting to be here tonight. I didn't tell you, but I'm very happy to be here. So, I could go on, and I hope you read some of my stories, but I just want to say a little bit about this movement, and then the alternative of nonviolence. Jonathan Shell says, he's a great writer, says, we now live in a world, everything is changing so fast. It's a world, what he calls, total violence. Total violence. Tonight, there are 30 wars. Millions of human beings involved in killing, preparing to kill, recovering from killing, or being killed. Meanwhile, what do these statistics mean? 3 billion people living in poverty without adequate homes, food, health care, jobs, education. No, that doesn't say. Did you see the little AP news headline in July? It came out right around the time Michael Jackson died, and it just got totally lost. So we're all obsessed with poor Michael Jackson's death. And there it says, according to the UN released at a press conference, it's official now, as of 6 weeks, over 1 billion people on the planet are starving to death right now. That should be headlines every day. We should just stop what we're doing. If we were, what, sane, moral, like A.R. Carrillo or Romero. And from this world of violence with corporate greed and war comes all the violence that we're all coping with here in Utah. Name anything. What? Prisons, racism, sexism, torture, executions, abortion, violence against women, violence against children. I mean, you can go on and talk about hundreds of different types of violence. But in this world of violence, in the history of violence, where it's been so normalized, I submit, we crossed the line in our global addiction to violence. We did on August 6, 1945, when we vaporized 120,000 people in Hiroshima. And then did it again 3 days later. We targeted Catholic Cathedral in Nagasaki. We knew 80 nuns were at mass there. We vaporized 70,000 people in a flash. And today, there's over 20, maybe 25,000 nuclear weapons on the planet, enough to blow the world up many, many times over. And I haven't even mentioned global warming. Our hatred of war that is leading us to the total brink. What did Dr. King say? Non-violence or non-existence. And this world of violence is totally normal, perfectly legitimate, meticulously legal to have 1 billion people starving to death, or the existence of thousands of nuclear weapons. I live now in New Mexico, not far from your neighbor, with the poorest state in the country, #1 in nuclear weapons, #1 in military spending. At Los Alamos, the birthplace of the bomb, business is booming, and because of that, we're #1 in domestic violence, #1 in drunk driving, #1 in suicide, worst education system. It's all playing out before my very eyes. And I see these connections. But friends, what's happened in these recent years is that not only is this violence just part of the air we breathe, you know, it's just totally inside of us. We're all violent through and through. Now, we've got a very fine, subtle, sophisticated spirituality of violence. It says, this is the will of God. In fact, violence saves us, might makes right. The good news is not love your enemies, but we get to kill them and steal all their stuff and be #1 because it's our manifest destiny. You know, my take on the history of the church in a nutshell, this will be in like one sentence, two sentences. The first 300 years, to follow this guy, you had to be a person of active nonviolence. But then the emperor came along and he supposedly converted. He said, okay, now you can all kill for the Roman Empire. We all went, oh, thank God. We threw out the Sermon on the Mount. We turned to the pagan Cicero, who started coming up with reasons to justify mass murder, so that by the time of St. Augustine and St. Aquinas, we had the beginnings of the just war theory. Then we had holy wars, the Crusades, where we got to go and kill millions of horrible people for Jesus. And today, the Catholic priest at Los Alamos blesses the nuclear bombs. And everybody building them is by and large Christian of some persuasion. As most of the Nazis were very devout, holy Christians and Catholics. So, what do you say this moment? Dr. King, Mahatma Gandhi, Dorothy Day, these great peacemakers, they come and they say, this is a whole new moment we're living in. And I'm going to put it very simply, what they say. Are you ready? Violence doesn't work. Yeah, that's helpful. Violence in response to violence always leads to further violence. It's a never-ending downward spiral. You reap what you sow. What goes around comes around. The means are the ends. Those who live by the sword, somebody said, will die by the sword. War cannot stop terrorism because war is terrorism. War never leads to peace. It always, always, always sows the seeds for future wars. How do I put this? War is bad for the economy. War is bad for jobs, believe it or not, in the long run, if you do the math. War is bad for your health. War is bad for animals. How am I doing here? War is bad for children. War is bad for the earth. War doesn't promote international solidarity. It doesn't build democracy. It does not lead to the spiritual life or help us do God's will. And if you're going to be against the culture of war and walk the road to peace, not only do we just finally have to grow up and say, no more war, and no more violence. Friends, I invite you, whatever spiritual or religious tradition you're in, to say, and this is what's gotten me in a lot of trouble. War is not the will of God. People run from the room screaming. I submit war is never justified. War is never blessed by God. If you do the research, I don't think war is actually endorsed by any major religion. War is the definition of the demonic. It's anti-human, anti-community, anti-creation. What? It's anti-democracy. It's anti-Christ, anti-life, anti-God. Peaceful means are the only way to a peaceful future and the God of peace. That's the hard lesson that they're telling us to finally grow up and accept. The problem for me is that Martin Luther King always goes back to Gandhi, who uses the clumsy word from Hinduism, ahimsa, to talk about this, nonviolence. Why? Because he's saying, well, the word peace doesn't work anymore. We're all for peace. George W. Bush was all for peace. Hitler, nobody was for peace like him. If you read his stuff, for 1,000-year peace. Love, what does that word mean? I love my car. You know, the word has lost its biblical meaning, but the word nonviolence, Gandhi and King said, can't quite be co-opted by the culture of violence. I invite you to use it, talk about it, define it. What would it mean for us, as ordinary people here in Salt Lake City, to take up this language of peace from Gandhi and Dr. King and try to become people of meticulously nonviolent? What does that mean? How could we create a Salt Lake City that is a community of nonviolence? You know, when I was writing my book, I thought maybe the best way to understand our lives today, and especially for those of us who are Christians who are trying to follow Jesus, is we are people who are finally making the move from violence to nonviolence. We're going to grow up and become like Gandhi and Dr. King. We're going to do it. Here's how I define it. I think nonviolence begins with the heart. It looks out upon the whole human race. If you're with me here, it sees every human being on the planet, all 6.4 billion.